So, Washington just called Mark Carney's middle power strategy a waste of time. They said it was a distraction. They say Canada cannot build serious influence without staying tied to the United States. But look at what Carney's been doing. Canada is signing major energy, defense, and trade agreements, building new partnerships across Europe and Asia, and giving other middle powers a reason to work together.
The strategy is already producing results. Canada is attracting investment, expanding its energy relationships, and looking at Swedish defense technology instead of assuming every major military decision has to run through Washington.
And Canada is not alone in this either. Norway, Sweden, Japan, South Korea, India, and other middle powers are all looking for more room to operate without depending on one major power for their security, energy, or economic future. And that's why Trump and Washington are so dismissive. The United States is not disproving the middle power strategy. It's denying that the strategy is working.
Yeah, because once countries discover they can negotiate together, trade with more partners, and build alternatives, American pressure becomes less effective. And while Washington tells Canada that American defense access is a privilege, not a right, the Pentagon is asking its own weapons companies to expand factories and produce missiles faster.
So Canada is being told to remain dependent on an American defense system that's under pressure by officials who are watching more allies build options outside of the United States. Prime Minister Carney is not waiting for permission anymore. He's putting the middle power strategy into practice.
And let's tell the truth here. America is just denying the inevitable. Canada and the world are no longer acting like they have only one move, and that really ticks off the U.S. government.
Now, Washington will tell you that all of this is temporary. A few agreements, a few defense conversations, a few countries looking for alternatives because they're upset with the current Trump administration. That's the explanation that's coming out of Washington. It's ridiculous. They're saying nothing fundamental is happening. Canada is simply reacting emotionally. Europe is overthinking its options, and the middle power idea will eventually disappear.
But how many agreements does it take before the pattern becomes impossible to ignore? How many new partnerships? How many countries deciding they want more than one supplier? And how many governments making plans that do not begin with the question, well, what does Washington allow us to do?
Yeah. Elbridge Colby, the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and another Trump mouthpiece, has dismissed the middle power approach as a distraction. He argues that the United States makes the best military equipment on Earth and produces it at scale that nobody else can match. But Canada is not trying to replace the entire American defense industry. Canada is trying to make sure that it has choices. And that is where Washington's argument starts to fall apart.
We all know Prime Minister Carney's approach is simple. Canada doesn't need to become a superpower. It needs to become useful to more than one group of countries. That means energy partnerships with Europe and Asia. It means defense discussions with Sweden and other European countries. It means using Canada's resources, geography, and industrial capacity to create relationships that work in both directions.
Take the LNG agreement involving 5 First Nations in BC, for example. The groups are preparing to invest up to $1 billion for a majority stake in planned storage infrastructure connected to LNG Canada's possible expansion. Now, that deal is still conditional on the expansion being approved, but it has already been recommended to the Major Projects Office, so we know it's on the fast track.
And that direction is important. Canada is not simply shipping resources out and waiting for someone else to decide who benefits. Indigenous communities are seeking ownership. Canada is building relationships with Asian consumers, and the country is trying to turn energy infrastructure into influence rather than treating it as a favor handed to foreign investors.
Then you had the agreement involving Ottawa, Alberta, and 5 major oil sands companies to accelerate oil production while moving forward with the Pathways carbon capture project. Again, this still has hurdles, but it shows that Ottawa is trying to use energy, emissions policy, and industrial investment together instead of handling each file in isolation.
And that is the middle power approach in plain English. Build enough value that other countries have a reason to work with you. Then build enough partnerships that no single country can casually shut the door and expect Canada to stand outside in the rain.
And that's why the recent deals matter. Each one gives Canada another relationship, another customer, another source of investment, or another bargaining option. And every new option makes the old dependence less necessary.
And we're not in this alone at all, Dave. Middle powers are looking around and asking whether depending too heavily on one major country is still a smart long-term plan.
Sweden has defense technology and a serious aircraft industry. Norway has military expertise, energy resources, and experience operating in difficult northern conditions. Japan and South Korea, they're looking for secure energy and industrial partnerships. And India is building its own strategic connections instead of allowing any one country to control its options.
So all these countries have different interests. They're not signing one secret agreement and forming a new military bloc overnight, but they are responding to the same pressure. Major powers, they want loyalty, access, and alignment. Middle powers want the ability to say yes when cooperation makes sense, and then say no when it doesn't.
And that distinction is becoming more and more important every day. A middle power does not need to reject the United States. It needs enough alternatives that rejecting one American demand doesn't create an economic or military crisis.
And hey, for decades, the United States benefited bigly from being the obvious choice. American equipment, American markets, American security relationships, and American political influence all reinforced one another. Now other countries are asking whether the obvious choice should remain the only choice. Because since Trump, we've seen how that turns out, right?
Yeah, definitely not good. And once that question, think about it, once it enters the conversation, the old arrangement becomes way harder to maintain.
The clearest test of Mark Carney's strategy is Canada's fighter jet decision. Canada has been committed to buying 88 American F-35 fighters, but Ottawa is still examining the Swedish Saab technology, including the Gripen aircraft and its early warning systems.
Now, we're still waiting on a final decision, which seems to be taking forever.
But the American option is no longer the automatic option, and that's a huge change. When Canada buys a fighter jet, it's not just buying the aircraft, it's buying maintenance, software, spare parts, training, upgrades, and decades of future cooperation.
Yeah, the jet arrives first, the dependence lasts much longer, and that's why this decision has become so important. Canada is asking whether it wants one defense relationship to control so much of its future military planning. And Canada can remain in NATO while making that decision. It can cooperate with American forces, share intelligence, and defend North America with the U.S.
At the same time, Canada can build defense relationships with other NATO members, Sweden, Norway, Germany, and other European countries. Cooperation with the USA does not require permanent dependence on Trump. And that is the sentence that Washington doesn't want repeated too often, because if Canada says it out loud, well, other allies are starting to follow and saying it out loud too.
Now, let's take a quick look at the contradiction coming from inside the U.S. While Elbridge Colby tells Canada that American military access is a privilege, not a right, love that one, the Pentagon is asking American defense companies to expand factories and speed up weapons production.
The USA stockpiles have been strained by weapons sent to allies and by military operations connected to Ukraine and the Middle East. Now, that doesn't mean the United States has run out of weapons yet, because the American military power remains enormously powerful. That's pretty much what their whole economy runs on.
True. The issue here is production capacity. How fast can missiles be replaced? How many allies can the United States supply if several conflicts continue at the same time? Well, because Trump has started them, right? So the report here roughly connects $20 billion in private investment to efforts to increase production of Patriot missiles and other high-demand weapons.
That's a serious investment. It also tells you that the problem is serious. You cannot solve a production bottleneck with a speech. You need factories, workers, raw materials, supply chains, and years of planning.
So Washington is making two arguments here at the same time. First, no middle power can operate without American defense technology. Second, the United States is asking its own defense companies to rebuild capacity because current demand is putting pressure on the system.
But that pressure gives Canada an even stronger reason to build relationships with more than one supplier.
And this is why the reaction from Washington is so absurd. Colby's not arguing against an idea sitting in a university lecture hall. He's responding to countries that are already making those different choices. This is happening whether they like it or not.
Everyone's negotiating. Canada's negotiating with Sweden. European countries are discussing more defense cooperation. Asian countries are strengthening energy relationships. Everyone's starting to look outside of the USA.
Yeah, in Canada, we're bringing in Indigenous ownership, energy exports, and industrial policy to that same conversation. And Washington's still saying there's nothing to see here? Huh, that's a little like a landlord watching the tenants move their furniture out while insisting that the building is fully occupied. Ridiculous, right?
Yeah, Trump wants allies to spend more, but he also wants to decide where that money goes. Right into his pocket. He wants countries to carry more responsibility, but he wants to remain the only supplier with real influence. He wants partners to accept that American access bin can be granted or withdrawn, and he wants the rest of the world to depend on the United States.
Then, he wants those same partners to promise that they'll never prepare for life without the U.S. You can't have your cake and eat it too, Donnie. That arrangement may have worked when the trust was automatic, but you know what? The trust is no longer automatic.
Yeah. And listen, we have said it before and we'll say it again. Prime Minister Carney is not trying to build an anti-American alliance. He's building a Canada that has more than one route forward. That's it. That means more energy customers, more defense suppliers, more investment partners, and more countries with a reason to see Canada succeed, not fail like what Trump is actively trying to do.
Yeah. If Canada can provide energy to Asia, defense cooperation to Europe, critical minerals to industrial partners, and security cooperation to NATO, then Canada has more leverage than it's ever had before. And leverage is what middle powers need.
And that's why this strategy is working. Every agreement doesn't need to be enormous, and every partnership doesn't need to become a formal alliance. The power comes from accumulation, and we can tell that is scaring Washington. Because one deal, it creates an opening. The next makes the opening wider, and eventually Canada has enough relationships outside Washington that no single capital can dictate every choice that we make.
Yeah, more countries are looking for that same freedom. They want to cooperate with America when it serves their interest, but they do not want their security, energy, or economic future controlled by one country.
The more Washington insists that middle powers cannot operate independently, the more reason those countries have to prove that they can, and the more weakness they're showing that they really need us.
Now, we want your prediction on this because this is an important thing that's happening. Will Canada reduce its F-35 order and move toward a broader European defense network? Or will this become a sticking point for the Kuzma negotiations?
Leave your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you check out the pinned comment for our merch store, our Substack, our private Facebook group, and for all the other fun stuff that's happening down there.
And don't forget to like, share, and hype it so other people can weigh in on this as well.
Thanks again for watching, everyone. You mean the world to us. Have a great day.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao
Ciao for now.